Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sacred Stories. This is our third season, and so excited to welcome Dr. Ezzie Spencer to kick off our third season. Really wonderful to have you here. So excited to dive in. So before we dive into our sacred conversation, I'm going to invite us to come into sacred space together. So I'm going to invite folks to take a beautiful deep breath in and to let it out. Feel yourself settle into your body a little bit. And Ezzie and I were just talking before we hit record about the way that spirit is interwoven into everything, and the way that spirit loves to be in dialogue with us, remind us of all of the sparks of divinity that surround us, the way that she likes to flirt with us even. And so I'm going to invite us to bring into our hearts a moment today that we felt connected to something beyond us. Maybe it was the feeling of sun on our cheek as we were walking down the street. Maybe it was the way that our dog looks at us in the most adorable way and makes us smile. Maybe it was a conversation with a blessed friend. Just connect to that magic that's around us. And holding those divine sparks in our heart, we come back together in sacred community. And it's just such a pleasure, Ezzie, to have you with us today. I have to say, your book, Lunar Abundance, which I have right here, which I know is like such a game changer for so many people, really gave me a way of using the wisdom of the moon and Mother Nature's cycles as a way to just be in more deep connection with the wisdom of nature and all of the metaphors for life as a human that she offers. And now you've done this beautiful pivot and you're coaching folks on really like creating the love stories that they've been dreaming about and connecting to love in new ways. And I'm just so excited to dive into your sacred story and to have you with us today. So thank you for being here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here. And we've got so many juicy parts of that story, and almost like the circle as well, the golden thread to wind through all of the work.
Yeah, so much so. So I would love for you to just introduce yourself, tell folks a little bit about you before we dive into your sacred story.
Yeah, well, I'm an author. I'm a coach. I'm a magical creature. I'm a being. And I am, I'm a human being. I'm very human as well. So part of my journey here on Earth, I think, has been around really marrying the magical realms, and the heavens, which were so I think innate and natural to me when I came into this world, with actually having my feet on the ground in 3D reality and learning how to be a muggle and to, and to weave heaven and earth together in that way. So I think that's, a big part of my essence. I suppose have had a very interesting career journey. I started out, as a very magical child, and then I went to law school and became a human rights lawyer, which was, I think, a necessary counterpoint, to bring in some of the left brain analytical, objective, perhaps more masculine way of operating in the world. I worked in domestic violence and sexual violence, a lot of dysfunctional relating, which is, interesting, of course, because now I've come full circle on that and I'm much more interested in coaching and working with like functional juicy relating. But I suppose almost like a bit of an antidote to the legal work that I was doing, because it was pretty heavy. I actually created the Lunar Abundance practice, which was this beautiful, magical, feminine, aligned with the moon practice, which I started as a passion, something I was doing on the side when I was doing my PhD. And then people asked me how they could work with me. And one thing led to another thing. I started doing paid sessions and then group coaching sessions. And then I had a global coaching business and I wrote a book, and it took me on all kinds of adventures. So that was a really fabulous, decade of my life, and is very much, I think has led me on the path to where I am now, doing the coaching work with re.love. So yeah, I live in New York City. I am a long way from home in Australia, but it is a place I've always wanted to live. So yeah, and the sun is shining right now. We were talking about, this before the interview.
It's all lit up. I know, it's so wonderful. Yeah.
After a long pandemic winter.
Yeah. Oh, so many thoughts, but first, maybe New York is such a special place in my heart. I mean, I lived there for 4 years for rabbinical school, and I went back, I think it right the summer before the summer when we could still travel. I went back for a retreat at Omega Institute, and I remember the plane landing at JFK and me feeling so emotional to be back in the city. There's no place like it. So yeah, I'm glad that
it has its own vibration, that's for sure.
Its own vibration, 100%. So I would love for you to dive into your sacred story and share kind of a little bit of the way that you've explored the wounded feminine, and maybe also if you want to share a little bit too with how you went from all your beautiful offerings around lunar abundance into what you're doing now too.
Yeah, for sure. So I am a big believer that our greatest soul work and our greatest gifts that we have to offer the world can come from our deepest wounds. It doesn't mean that, you can't also play to your strengths and natural abilities and have things to offer there. But I feel like the very big, courageous work is often that work that requires us to do the inner descent into the most raw and painful places inside of ourselves. And I think I've been dancing with that in many ways throughout my whole career. Like I touched on before, I'd had this career where I'd started, out being very much in the belly of the beast, working in domestic violence, doing my PhD in domestic violence and sexual assault. So, I had a high level of professional expertise in that area, and then also did my own dash in the dark in terms of my own personal experience falling into a toxic relationship and having a huge amount of shame, as a result of that, because, I think, there's a high standard that I was holding myself to because of the level of intellectual understanding that I had around, what that might look like or what the warning signs might be. And yet, I still fell into that. And came out of it, but then, had a series of relationships which were less than. And there was one particular night which was a catalyst for really, changing the focus of my work, because I realized just the depth that I still personally had to go to inside of myself. And I was I was at a party, and so I was dating a guy, and I was there at the party, and he was ignoring me. He was stonewalling me, and that's just what he did, because that was the kind of behavior that I used to tolerate from the men I date. I'm interested in men, and so that was the kind of behavior which I had just had as normal. Like, at least this guy wasn't sort of abusive. Like, he was just treating me like I just wasn't actually good enough, right? And so what was different about this particular moment, because it wasn't an extremely traumatic experience, right? But what happened was at the end of the evening, a good friend of mine who was also at the party, who'd been observing what had been going on throughout the evening and knew just how much I liked this particular human and how much, I really wanted to get into, something very serious and long-term and committed, turned to me and she looked at me and said, "But he's not devoted to you." And she said it as a statement, but the question mark was written all over her face, which was, "Why are you here? Why are you like, what?" And she was in a very healthy relationship with a man who was really devoted to her. And she just couldn't grok how, her friend for whom like she wanted the best for was in this situation. And again, like a small moment in the scheme of, traumatic relationship experiences that I'd had. But in that particular moment, I was engulfed in shame because I was seen. And again, I should have known better. This was another example of where, again, like living from the neck up still was not actually helping me to move the needle or to shift the deeper blocks. And the realization for me then was that I did have a real inner barrier, because as I saw the look on her face and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is wrong, this situation, I know it was wrong. That's why I felt ashamed."
Yeah.
But at the same time, as I tuned into feeling what would it feel like for this particular man in this moment to turn around and to be devoted to me, I actually realized that that was repulsive to me. My entire body just found that to be a horrific prospect.
Yeah.
And that was when I realized, okay, there's an inner barrier to love here. I've got to go down to the root of what it is that is not allowing me to receive the kind of behavior, attention, and love that I deserve. Why can't I be revered and cherished? Why does that evoke danger signals of nausea and so forth inside of me? And so from that point, that was where I really got help. And I realized this was something that I couldn't continue to do on my own. I did end up working with a master healer who was able to really hold me. We were able to go down into the roots of what was operating for me on actually a deep soul level. Because a lot of this stuff actually transcends, experiences that even I had had in this particular lifetime. That's my experience personally. It does come through, the ancestral line, or depending on your belief system, we can come in with things on our tape.
100%. Yeah.
Various places. And then, getting down to the root of what was, blocking my ability to fully anchor into my own self-worth, then really did change everything for me, my relationship with myself, but then what I was able to receive from others.
Yeah. Oh, so beautiful. Do you feel comfortable sharing a little bit of what was at that root once you start to?
Oh yeah. I mean, there was a lot. No.
Yeah.
Layers. And, I guess it's actually, for me, like there are plenty of individual stories and moments, but actually what was more relevant for me was that there was a tremendous amount of shame that I was carrying around, even being a woman and being in my feminine. There was a huge amount of grief, which I was experiencing about the ways that I had abandoned myself. And I had kept the lid on some of those deeper emotions. They were repressed. So I hadn't allowed them to be fully felt and fully aired. And therefore, when they were entwined with particular like unconscious belief patterns. Again, you know, some individual stories and entanglements in particular, you know, relationships in my life. You know, it was sort of a hot mess underneath the hood, but really going into surfacing what, you know, what was imprinting, or what was, I suppose, a series of imprints on my unconscious, which was unconsciously then guiding my thoughts and actions and behavior, going in, really being with it, not just looking at it, not intellectualizing it, but fully feeling it allowed for that transmutation process to occur, you know, to alchemize that pain into, you know, the fuel for greater opening and dissolution of those blocks.
Yeah, so beautifully said. And I think for myself too, you know, when we allow ourselves to really feel it, and not keep pushing it down, I often find, I mean, in the moment, the emotions are intense and strong, but it's so beautiful to just let them come out instead of stuffing them down again and again. And I'll share maybe a little bit, because I was telling you before we hit record, like I'm in a new relationship and have found I've just been uncovering all of this unconscious stuff that I was holding on to that I didn't even realize. And it's been pretty profound. You know, I'm lucky that I have a girlfriend who's incredibly steady and can hold me in that space. But just, you know, vows that I had made to myself as a teenager that like, no one is going to do this to me again, and like super, super protective and I would say overly boundaried, you know, like that I was just being, the ways that I was putting up walls, you know, that wouldn't let someone else in, even though all that I wanted was something that was incredibly deep and connected. So yeah, like once you start to uncover that, it's like, oh, great. Now I at least know what's under the surface and I can work with it a little bit, you know. But I noticed, I was having a conversation with a friend the other day about how I was feeling so like this, I was resisting so hard, you know, I was feeling so much discomfort around some dynamics in my relationship. And my girlfriend had said to me over the phone, like, I miss you. And I was noticing how much, you know, how it was just triggering my own stuff of like, oh no, what if this person is too needy? Or what if they need too much from me? Or all these things, you know, that just came from like this one loving comment that someone had made, you know. And I was talking to a dear friend about it, and she was saying that she too has kind of danced with seeing like how our unconscious wounds can trigger us and run the show and detract from what we want. So once we get to like unearth some of those in a really loving way, then stuff gets really good. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that part around it being unearthed in a really loving way, because that's the key. We can't even find these unconscious vows or, you know, these scars in a way unless we have the right ingredients of firstly self-love and self-compassion, but then also being in a loving, safe container, a relational container, whether that be an intimate romantic partner who can hold it, or, you know, in a therapeutic, you know, / healer, you know, / coach environment, like, but whatever the relational container looks like, it needs to be so solid to be able to even find some of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're not meant to do it alone. I think that this really beautiful soul work needs someone else to walk by your side. Yeah, you do it. So I would love to hear a little bit about the way that you are working with folks now, and, you know, the re.love method, and how you're helping people to uncover what's keeping them from what they really want in life.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there's a couple of elements to it. So firstly, we do actually work directly with unconscious vows. So if I'm working privately with someone or one-on-one with someone, then we go through a 3-step process where we're lasering in with specificity on what exactly is an unconscious self-protection mechanism, because, you know, you're spot on. It usually is a self-protection mechanism because a decision has been made at a younger stage in life. Or again, like sometimes I find with women, the mother can even make the decision and it can be inherited.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
mother either wants to protect herself or protect her daughter. And I tend to work mostly with women, you know, so I do see this happen. But then firstly, so it's identifying with specificity what exactly is just outside of our frame of vision and yet still running the show, still guiding the choices. What exactly is it? It's a bit of a whodunit Agatha Christie novel, right? You know, that's where I laser in and help people to identify that, but then release the block and then rewrite it, you know, rewrite the story, because we always have the power, I believe, to be the authors of our own internal experience, right? And so we can always go through a process of, you know, and we step into an elevated emotional state together. We really make this an embodied, somatic, physical, sensory experience of rewriting the story. What do you want your new present? It doesn't even have to be the future. It can be right here, right now. How do you want to feel? And again, you know, this is it's a deep process. You know, when we do this in session, it's not done with the mind. We need to drop out of the mind and come into the body. It's a facilitated process. And then going through a reintegration and recalibration experience, which usually does involve dialoguing with, you know, a younger part of ourselves, like chatting to the teenager who made that decision, you know, at that particular time, letting her know that it's safe, you know, to come along, go through a beautiful process of self-compassion, self-apology, and self-forgiveness, which is just so incredibly profound, you know, and the sort of that earth-shattering at the core shift that can happen in the moment very quickly, you know, when we go through that process of real self-forgiveness, I think can then, you know, change things in an instant, which then means we show up and we have a very different conversation with the world, with our words, yes, but also with our energy, you know, because our heart's open, and that attracts different experiences to us, and we can see them, we can recognize different people, different opportunities, you know, when they show up and have a different conversation. So that's part of the process. And then, you know, overall, there's like the re.love journey. It's a magical experience. It's a journey. And I work with groups as well. And we go from what's, you know, really what I call is the island. And you can imagine, you know, the old European walled fortress,
Right.
which is like, you know, the walled fortress in the middle of the moat, you know, that circular body of water, which is where a lot of people end up, you know, after they've been so badly hurt.
Yes.
You know, they might have, you know, wonderful friendships, and they might have fantastic, you know, relationships with people professionally and with their clients, you know, but still having those walls around their heart in terms of bringing in romance, right? You know, that's where I tend to find people, is on the island, and I take them across the moat, which can be, you know, a dark and scary place to swim across, you know, over to what we call the garden. And the garden is really like, where do you want to live? You know, what might the life look like that you can create for yourself? How would it feel if you're living in this fecund, juicy, delicious place, you know, with your feet on the luscious earth and having, you know, the stars above you with all of your vision, you know, and you can have an abundance. You can have an abundance of love in that place, you know, but it's a journey. It's a journey to swim across the moat. And most people, you know that there's the garden. They've got the dream that there's something on the other side. But then, you know, they put their foot in the water and they're like, oh, you know, oh, this is going to be a lot to get across. So, you know, it's a guided process that I take people, you know, across into the garden, and so they can start living, you know, really living and be anchoring in that place.
I love that metaphor so much. And I mean, I know that folks who are listening can feel in their body the like verdant fecundity of everything that you're talking about. It's so lush and it's so beautiful. And, what I keep coming back to is that is ultimate truth, like this life that is so juicy and expansive and abundant and rich is what the universe wants to give us, and is true co-creation and action. And yet, like we're humans, right? And we have these ways that we start to put our foot in the water and then freak out a little bit, or block our own paths. Yeah. I love what you're saying too, Ezzie, about rewriting our story, because that's an idea that I work with a lot. And it's interesting, in Judaism we have this conception of the book of life and being inscribed in the book of life each year. Like each year we're kind of re-inscribed, and we get to rewrite our story and what we want our story to be. So I'm wondering, like, can you give us some examples of what someone's story might be that they rewrite?
Yeah, definitely. I think, first and foremost, I would say it's the story of belief, that feeling like, oh yeah, this actually isn't possible for me, because all my experience, and when I say this, having, real love, really being able to attract someone even, who's in a who is going to be able to show up in a way where you can create a healthy, safe, secure relational container together, right? So many people have been so deeply wounded or so disillusioned or disheartened by the experience of either having a series of toxic or dysfunctional relationships, or even just having their heart broken, right? And getting to a certain age and saying, oh well, society says I'm basically over the hill, so I may as well give up. So that Disney version of love isn't possible for me, right? And so even just coming into a place of like real, firstly, clarity inside of themselves about, well, what does real love look like? Like, what would a beautiful, healthy, loving relationship look like for you? Not from the head, but from the heart and from your soul. Like, what's your actual blueprint? So getting clarity around that and anchoring back into the optimism and confidence that, yes, like if there's a blueprint inside of your heart for that, then absolutely that's possible for you in this lifetime. Once you strip back the external conditioning of, what society says that might look like, and coming into what that might genuinely look like for a person, then I can really help that person to firstly come into that, positive, elevated emotional state of hope, but then also confidence, and then have the courage to take the action that's necessary to be, say, visible, to be able to attract in possible contenders or suitors, and to know how to recognize someone who's going to be in alignment, with what the soul is really thirsty for, and how to connect and how to move into relationships. So that's probably one of the biggest examples that comes up. Another one is just, again, around self-worth, like not feeling like someone is, deserving or worthy of love.
Yeah. And those go back often to like just such tender childhood moments. Yeah. I'm thinking though, about what you were saying about like giving people the space to actually voice the vision, the dream, the desire. And I love this idea that our desires are the preview of our destiny. Our desires are the preview of our destiny. Like precisely the fact that we have them is so that is because they want to be realized, and so giving people that affirmation is just so huge. Yeah. Oh, beautiful. So I'd love to kind of come back to your story a little bit. So you have this moment at the party of realizing that the relationship that you're in is not one of devotion, that goes in both directions. And then your own beautiful soul work of kind of uncovering your blocks. where would you say spirit or your heart are calling you now? Like, what are the things that are feeling alive for you now on your journey?
Yeah, I think it's a process of ever deepening, right? So I think, a realization that I had was that, again, to, reference back that Disney version of love,
Yes.
It's not like you're like, oh, great, found my unconscious vows. Like now I'm fixed,
Yeah.
It's obviously so much more nuanced and complex than that. Or actually it's actually complex is the wrong word. It's actually very simple. And I'm a believer in the beautiful Rumi quote, which is that we're not here to seek love, we're here to find all of the barriers that we've built against it and to dissolve those barriers, and I deeply believe that, part of my own reason for incarnating, on the planet at this time is to dissolve these blocks to love, to come back to my true essence, which is love. I believe love is the language of the universe. I think many of us share this. And so going into deeper and deeper intimacy and vulnerability and relating with the other is part of what's being, the path that I'm being drawn on now. And I think that's probably infinite.
I was going to say, yes, the rest of our lives, we get to be on that beautiful unfolding. Yeah. Oh, and I love that you brought up that Rumi quote. I have Rumi all over my house. Another one of my favorites is what you seek is seeking you. This idea that there are beautiful souls out there who are looking for what we're looking for also. And it doesn't come in the like Disney tied up with a bow package version. It's really real. And that first step is like just being able to really lovingly look at where we're holding ourselves from what we really want, and then being able to shift it in a way that feels loving and fun and with such potential and joy. Yeah. Oh, so beautiful. I had an aha the other day about the way that my love for my girlfriend was conditional. And that was so big. When that dropped in, I was actually listening to a Brene Brown podcast, her Daring Greatly podcast, all about leadership. And I made this leap in my head while I was working out and listening to this podcast, and realizing, that when we put that on someone else, then we put it on ourselves too, right? What are the ways that I'm showing up conditionally for myself, and not a way that's, expansive and judgment-free and all of those things. So yeah, it's like deeper and deeper layers of the onion, and it gets to be really beautiful if we can hold it that way.
Yeah. And I so agree with all of that, and certainly the tenderness that comes, the deeper and deeper we go.
Yeah. Would you like to share a moment from working with one of your clients that was just really meaningful for them, that you feel like maybe is a fun example of the way this work can be so powerful?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say every single session with a client,
Right.
Oh, what's this one going to be? Come into the cauldron, and of course I get to grow and shift every time as well. And I just love it. But, one that comes immediately to mind is a session that I had with a really beautiful client. I mean, all of my clients are beautiful. The kind of people that I work with are so high functioning, and they're so successful. And then it's so astonishing to me sometimes, when they come to me for help, because I'm like, wow, from the outside, I would never have known that this is operating under the surface. But then what I found is, as I go deeper with clients, it's like the same themes continue to come up.
Yeah.
And one thing that's recurrent in many of my sessions is around needs. And how when I start to support a client to really get clear on what her needs are.
Yeah.
And I have quite a few different sort of levels of needs, tiers of needs, types of needs, self-care needs, survival needs, relational needs. We go into a lot of depth around this, but oftentimes even self-care survival needs can be very difficult for a client to connect with. And again, this is not intellectually, on an intellectual level, she may know that, but this is actually coming down again to the unconscious vows or to the roots of what she feels that she's worthy of. And one client in particular, came in and I remember asking her, okay, cool, let's tune in, let's get connected with your self-care needs. And if anything isn't met, let's start creating plans around, getting those needs met and communicating what you need to communicate. In relationship. And she, I remember she came back and said, okay, I want this and this and this. And I was like, okay, cool. So those are your desires, let's talk about your needs.
Right.
And she's like, looked at me blankly and she's like, but I literally have no needs. I only have desires. And, this woman again, she was like so sensual, like so gorgeous, so successful. And I looked at her and I was like, no, you can have needs, it's okay. And just for her to realize, that she had absolutely put any of her own needs on the back burner because she didn't feel like she was worthy of needs. And she felt like if she needed anything, and again, here we're talking self-care, survival needs here, but she felt like if she even acknowledged to herself that she needed anything, then she would be rejected and abandoned by everyone in her life who she loved. Right? Because she thought her having needs would be so incredibly repulsive.
Yes.
To everybody else.
Yeah.
And she went through her entire life prioritizing everybody else's needs above her own.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's such a beautiful example. And I'm sitting here thinking as you're sharing, she didn't just put her needs on the back burner. She threw them out the window. They were not allowed to be there. Yeah. 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 And I'm sure so many can relate to this, especially those of us who are socialized as women, expressing our needs is selfish or overindulgent or, whatever. Yeah.
Bossy, repulsive. Yeah. Not safe. All those things.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm interested kind of along these lines. I've been thinking, I'm a Libra, so I'm always in that dance of balance. So this is a lot of my questions go that way. I've been thinking about this dance between setting healthy boundaries for ourselves and our needs versus putting up a fortress or a wall or a moat, and I'd love to hear you riff on this a little bit and how you think about this, how you coach folks, asking for what we need without it being, without it pushing people away, and also maybe getting really clear that our needs are coming not from wounds, but from true desires.
Yeah. And just what we need is, needs and needs, we just we require them in order to survive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great question. So I think that, a lot of the time, if I'm working with someone, then I'm figuring out at the outset, where are they in relation to boundaries, right? Because if someone has no boundaries at all, then setting very clear boundaries from the outside in, so by using communication scripts and by getting clarity and, starting to say no, even if they feel really uncomfortable about that, but being very firm with people in their lives might be the appropriate step, right? But for a lot of people, once they've established some of those, clear boundaries, or with, people who are problem people or difficult people in their lives, we tend to work to the next level of boundary setting, which is a little different. It's around actually setting beautiful boundaries from the inside out, right? So it's like growing these beautiful organic boundaries from within, and they naturally emanate from having high self-worth. And what I find a lot of the time is an impediment to self-worth is can again be repressed emotion, and guilt can be a really big one. So again, speaking about needs, if someone feels like I need a little bit of space, tonight, or, I need some time for myself, or, I need to be able to focus on my work rather than like just cooking dinner or doing the chores or, servicing somebody else, or which might be a normal part of, whatever relational dynamic that is. But then allowing, let's get to the root of any guilt or obligation or people pleasing that might be underneath that full embodiment of self-worth. Then once we've gone down to the root and we've released that, and again, guilt tends to be an emotion which can be extremely intergenerational, and again, can be gendered and can be taken on from the collective. I'm always saying to women, like, it's not your fault. You're experiencing this, but we can also go down to the root and release it, grow the boundaries from the inside out by having this deeper sense of real embodied self-worth. And then from that place, it becomes very natural and elegant to then say, hey, no, that won't work for me today, but hey, what about next week, right? Rather than no, I'm unavailable, full stop, right? Which can be a bit of a fortress. And look, like if you're saying that all the time to people in your life, then ultimately they will go away, right? Because they're not going to feel like they're invited or they're welcome in your life either. So there can be an elegance and a grace in how you communicate that comes again when there's no emotional static or no emotional baggage or feeling this obligation to try to please someone else or do what they want, because otherwise you feel bad about yourself as a person.
I love that. And I just feel energetically the difference of coming from love versus coming from a trigger, right? Like the energy of it is night and day. It's interesting. I'm thinking too about shifts that I have recently made. I'm someone who, growing up, I had a parent with big mental health struggles. And so I had a lot of, kind of big engulfing energy around me in a way that felt like, like I was being engulfed, So my coping strategy as a teen was, really, I would say even into my 20s was like a lot of rigidity around my time, wanting to control what I did when, my way of like taking back control in a situation where I didn't have any was to be really rigid, and a lot of independence, and that kind of thing. And so it's been this interesting dance for me of both honoring like my desires around free time, independence, control over my schedule, all of that, and also like making space to really let another person in, and do that in a way that feels both like it's honoring me and it's honoring our relationship. And it's been a dance. I don't think I have it 100% figured out, but I definitely know the feeling in my body when I'm coming from trigger and like putting up walls versus, just realizing that it would feel better to me to, have a few nights to myself or whatever it is.
I love that story. And I think, so many of us can relate to that feeling of being engulfed or losing ourselves. And and putting in place, really important, boundaries as a survival mechanism. And just talking about the island again for a second from my previous metaphor, I think is important, because one of the things which, I really do a lot with clients is to celebrate just how smart their survival mechanisms actually were. Like if you're in a very dysfunctional environment, or, a situation which is very unstable or volatile, as a young, sensitive person, it can actually be the most intelligent and most loving thing that you can do for yourself, is to erect some of these structures, like the island structures, or to make these self-protective unconscious vows to keep yourself in a place where you're able to retain an element of energetic sovereignty. The key thing is knowing, like, when have the costs of that outweighed the benefits? When has that survival strategy really, outlived its purpose? And when are you still unconsciously running it in a way that's inhibiting real love coming into your life? So I love your story and how you're dancing with that in real time and being so tuned in with your body, because that's what's actually going to give you the cues. The self-awareness in connection with the embodiment is really the way to navigate, that journey with, a beautiful, responsive partner with whom you're communicating with so beautifully, and drawing them closer. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you. And, one of the things that I tell folks that I'm working with too is, at least for myself, I know I'm in my trigger when I get a recurring loop in my head of the same words again and again. So maybe it's like, this is unsustainable, or I can't do this, or this and this about this person is not going to work, or whatever it is. It tends to loop and loop and loop around. And that's like an instantaneous cue for me of, this isn't actually deep truth. This is me. This is like old security systems going off that are being invited to be loved and brought to the surface and shifted in new ways. Yeah. I love it. I think I want to pivot to creating your high vibe love field.
Oh, yeah.
That's like the most delicious thing ever. Anything that has to do with high vibe love fields, I'm in. Yeah. Will you share just a little bit about that offering process?
Yeah, definitely. All right. So high vibe love field is a word which I use in re.love, because I have a magical language in re.love. You're going to just make it fun, I think
totally.
It's like, ooh, trudging along. It's like, no, let's get into the feminine magnetism and joy of it. So when I'm talking about a high vibe love field, that's really that place when you're in that beautiful, embodied self-worth, which is your natural state, to have, you are valuable, you have intrinsic value as a human being. So just really embodying that, is where we get to in re.love. And then what that then looks like is having beautiful boundaries, always being able to, express these in the moment, even if it feels uncomfortable, right? But to feel that confidence to be able to do so, to have really high standards in your life. So then, when people show up in your life and they're not meeting those standards, or their behavior is less than, you're able to recognize that right away. You're able to communicate and say, oh, hey, okay, that won't work. It'll be this, and if that person isn't able, to meet that standard, to be in that beautiful place of trust and surrender, and just let them go and know that there's an abundance of incredible, people out there who will show up and who'll be able to meet you where you're at, right? So what I find is that when a lot of people come in to work with me, they have a leaky love field, which is like, all of these gaps and, again, blind spots. They're often not aware of what's holding them back. They often feel like guilty about having standards, or guilty about, expressing their needs, like we spoke about before. So, what we do is we, plug the gaps, if you will, but, we're doing it, again, from the inside out. So we're growing like that energetic vibration, right? So then, they're able to show up in the world, be in their beautiful feminine magnetism, being able to, really bring into their field people who are going to meet their standards, but then recognize, when those people are showing up as well, because the package might not always look like what your mind thinks that it will look like, right? And so having that responsiveness and aliveness to what's actually being presented, being able to receive what's actually, in your highest interest and what feels good and what's going to serve you is part of the, having that high vibe love field.
I love that. And I love how you're really highlighting how it all starts within, right? Like we nourish, both the tender wounds, the unconscious blocks, and then we create this space for love to just flow out of us. And then we're able to attract the people that we want to attract. Yeah. I'm wondering, I was smiling as you were talking because I was thinking about the Cinderella story that we're all fed, or maybe just this kind of overly simplistic, like Pollyanna version of what love can look like. And I'll just share for myself too. My relationship is now about 3.5 months along, so we're still very early. And it has not been ponies and rainbows. I mean, I think for both of us, I said to my girlfriend, I'm like, where's the honeymoon period? It's been so sacred and so beautiful. And I think, I'll speak for myself, doing some of these shifts and showing up differently and noticing where I'm putting my own shit on someone else isn't ponies and rainbows. Like that's, those are big things to shift. And so it's been a process for me too of getting to say, yeah, this might not look the way I thought it would, at least at the beginning of like La La Land together, and seeing the way that it's so deeply beautiful and that I have someone who can hold me in that space and I can do the same for her. So I'm wondering, yeah, like if you work with clients around kind of dismantling some of the assumptions that folks have about the way it's supposed to look.
Oh yeah, all the time, right? Because there's so many, externally generated beliefs and opinions and judgments that is which is actually part of the process, and some of those actually do come from the outside in, and some of those are internalized. So when I mean by the outside in, it's like when you get into a new relationship, but it's not all ponies and rainbows, as you say at the outset. Other people can express concern, and they might be trying to be protective of you if they know that you've had a checkered past, in your relational history. They might have opinions and judgments.
Yeah.
It might be for the best, right? But it might not actually be taking a stand for you and where you're at this particular moment in time after you've done the deep work. And similarly, you might have internalized over the years, like what it might look like. And so definitely helping women to be in their own energetic sovereignty. And we set up very clear, I guess, criteria. We call them the secret keys. We call them the gemstone keys. Again, like there's the opal key, there's the ruby key, like there's all these kind of magical components of the program. So it's not like boring, but we're constantly coming back to the criteria which we've mapped in dialogue with our hearts, in dialogue with our souls. We have a foundational document where we go through and we get so clear on so many components of what is actually true for us. And then when you've built that solid foundation of self-awareness, self-knowledge, self-worth, what that looks like, what that feels like, then that's something you can always keep coming back to in these moments of like, oh, hang on a sec, I'm really being triggered here in this moment. Is this healthy? Is this right? Like, is this okay? Is this a red flag? Is this a sign that this isn't something that's good for me? And so definitely, a lot of my clients actually have had difficult relationships in the past. So I'm standing there as their advocate in those situations as well, but continuing to center, their own experience, bring them back to their own sovereignty. And it always comes back to the body, to the physical sensations and to what it is that, that they've crafted for themselves as they're crossing the moat, as they're coming into the garden, and continuing to hold that vision for them for what it is that they're creating.
I love that. And I just want to highlight the wisdom of our body. It's such an instantaneous cue system. For those of us who have kind of been on this path for a while, like the tightness in our stomach or in our throat or in our chest, whatever it is, like there's an instantaneous cue of, is this feeling good or not so good? So thank you for highlighting that. And, I'm thinking too, I work with folks a lot on connecting with their soul wisdom. And that's, just that deeper knowing. It's our inner knowing, inner wisdom, inner truth. And that's such a helpful touchstone when we're feeling like we're, wrestling with a decision, or is this right? All those things, like when we can tap into that, the base note, of inner knowing, that's such a beautiful source of discernment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's, I've used it for myself too. I'll share again, like I've had these moments of being, my own doubts and old stuff creeping up. And yet when I check in with my heart and my soul, it's like, Jess, the one thing that you're meant to do in this lifetime is create a beautiful love story. Like, it's so obvious, it's like, why are you even questioning this? So yeah, it can be really reassuring when we're able to hear that truth. Yeah, beautiful. Oh, well, Ezzie, it's been just a delight to be in conversation with you. And I know so many folks are going to be excited to hear more about your work and your offerings. Do you want to share your offerings and where folks can find you and all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do I offer a group program coaching, which is this beautiful re.love experience, which I mentioned before. And the best place to find out about that is over on my website, ezziespencer.com. Jump on over to my emails, because that's where I announce the enrollment for the group program. I also do one-on-one coaching as well. So you can get in touch on ezziespencer.com, my website, to connect with me if this feels resonant. And there's more details over there on the website as well. I also have a free quiz on my website, which helps you to identify where exactly you are on the re.love wheel, where you're blocked on the re.love wheel. That's sort of the diagnostic. And then if you go through that re.love quiz, then there is a free love potion, which I will send to you, which is a beautiful audio, which helps you to start to dissolve that block as well. So again, that's at ezziespencer.com. I'm also on Instagram. So Ezzie Spencer on Instagram, and I'm often ripping on my DMs on my stories and about, various things that are coming up, themes, tips, that type of stuff. So do come over and say hi. I really love to connect with people. So if anything that I'm saying here is resonating, then the re.love medicine might be, having a conversation with your soul. So do come over and say hi.
Oh, beautiful. So many goodies, folks. Take the quiz so you can get a free love potion. Who doesn't want that? I love it. Oh, wonderful. Well, I know that our conversation today provided so many fun nuggets for folks to chew on, things to think about in how we approach all the relationships in our lives, romantic and otherwise. So thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. We'll have all the info about you on my website and all the links to your goodies too. So invite folks to check that out. And just sending a giant dollop of love and high vibe love fields to all of our listeners.
Beautiful.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ezzie.